About 150 years ago, songwriter Philip Bliss wrote these words: "Standing by a purpose true, heeding God's command, honor them, the faithful few. All hail to Daniel's band. Many mighty men are lost, daring not to stand, who for God had been a host by joining Daniel's band. Many giants great and tall, stalking through the land, headlong to the earth would fall, if met by Daniel's band." The chorus: "Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known." I would think that Mr. Bliss had Daniel in mind. And we're looking, when he wrote that song, at the book of Daniel. And this book will be considered by examining each of its 12 chapters in separate outline fashion. And I would say of the Old Testament books, Daniel would be one of my very favorite book to teach. A Divine Diet, chapter 1, A Statue in a Stone, chapter 2, A Fiery Furnace, chapter 3, A Tree in Turmoil, chapter 4, A Heavenly Hand, chapter 5, The Lions and the Lion-Hearted, chapter 6, Godless Kingdoms and the Kingdoms of God, chapter 7, The Horns of the Heathen, chapter 8, The Secret of the 77s, chapter 9, The Conflict Above the Clouds, chapter 10, A Chronology of Christless Kings, chapter 11, and Closing Conditions, chapter 12. Here's our introduction. 3 pagan kings and a Jewish prime minister, a story of decrees, determination, dreams, and deliverance. Daniel was a teenager taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar during the first siege at Jerusalem in 605 BC. He was of royal blood. While in captivity, without the slightest compromise, he faithfully served under the administration of 3 kings, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius. He himself was ministered to by heaven's recorded archangels, Gabriel and Michael, the only one, by the way, in the Bible that had this privilege. He has more to say about the coming Antichrist than any other Old Testament writer. And one of his contemporaries, Ezekiel, refers to the righteousness and wisdom of Daniel, comparing him with Noah and Job. In fact, Jesus later would quote from the book of Daniel during his Mount Olivet discourse in Matthew 24. I think the unusual feature of this book is that Daniel wrote the central portion, and that would be chapters 2 through 7, in the Aramaic language. I think Daniel may be compared to Joseph, for both men had the gift of interpreting dreams. That's the Joseph of the Old Testament. And his book marks the third of 4 great periods of miracles in the Bible. Miracles in the time of Moses and Joshua, and then Elijah and Elisha, Daniel, Ezekiel, and then of Christ and his disciples. Daniel's life may be characterized by purpose, prayer, and prophecy. In matters of prayer, Daniel offers the first of 3 great confessional prayers over the sins of Israel. These 3 are Daniel's prayer in chapter 9, Ezra's prayer in chapter 9, Nehemiah's prayer in chapter 1 of his book. Now, prophecy in Daniel, he relates the following: the rise and fall of 4 Gentile kingdoms, followed by the establishment of Christ's glorious kingdom, the world-famous Battle of Arbela between the Greeks and the Persians and its outcome some 225 years in advance, and the most profound Old Testament prophecy concerning God's timetable for Israel. That's the secret of the 77s. And the actual number of days between the rapture and the millennium, a total of 1,335 days. The greatest number of fulfilled prophecies found in a single Bible chapter. Daniel 11 contains over 100 such predictions concerning historical events which have already transpired. And the 2 important statues are described in the book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar was associated with both. He saw the first in a dream. He built the second on a plain. God was behind the first, Satan was behind the second. And the statue that he built on the plains of Dura marked the second of three satanic attempts to unify the world through a false religious system. These are the Tower of Babel, the golden statue, and the Antichrist statue in Revelation 13. Important facts in Daniel, two of the Old Testament greatest examples of divine preservation in times of terrible danger. A fiery furnace and a den of lions. And the only Old Testament description of the Father, if indeed the Ancient of Days is the Father, and I believe that he is, found in Daniel chapter 7. Another fact, one of the two most pronounced types of the Antichrist in the Old Testament, Antiochus Epiphanes, and Haman would have been the other one. The only biblical book mentioning both Gabriel and Michael, heaven's two archangels, and an explanation of why our prayers may sometimes be hindered. If you're studying what the Bible has to say about prayer, make sure you read carefully Daniel chapter 10. All right, chapter 1, a divine diet. Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, among with some other Hebrew youths, are selected by Nebuchadnezzar to prepare themselves for a life of political service. But Daniel determines not to defile himself with the king's food. Now, we don't know why, but perhaps the meat and wine may have been sacrificed to false gods, and it may have been prohibited under the Mosaic law, but for whatever reason he decided not to. But he recommended this. He proposed a test, suggesting a 10-day diet of only vegetables and water. At the end of this short time, his superintendent could compare Daniel and his friends with the others who ate the king's rich food. Well, the terms of this test were granted, and what happened? They were 10 times stronger, at the end of the 10-day test, and they were 10 times smarter at the end of the 3-year training period. And so, because of this, Daniel then is later appointed a political career, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's Daniel chapter 1. Now, Daniel chapter 2, a statue and a stone. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian monarch, had a terrifying nightmare and called his entire cabinet to relate and interpret his dreams. Well, they weren't able to do that. And so he pronounced a death penalty. Now, what happened? He said, fellas, I've had a doozy. He said, here's what I want you to, first of all, tell me what I dreamed, and then I want you to tell me the interpretation. Well, of course, they couldn't do that, and so they were stalling for time. They said, I tell you what, you're busy, we're busy. Why don't you just tell us what you dreamed, and we'll think of some crazy interpretation. He said, now look, you guys, I pay you $225,000 a year in expenses, maybe something like that, and you better tell me not only what my dream meant, but what my dream was, or you are dead meat. Well, they weren't able to do this, and they were all condemned to death, including Daniel and his three friends who were not at the meeting, but they were part of the cabinet. He was going to wipe out the entire cabinet. When Daniel found out about it, he made his way to his prayer chamber, and he and his friends prayed, and God revealed Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel, and then he gets an appointment in the Oval Office to see King Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, this is what you saw, and I'm going to tell you what it meant, but here's what you saw. You saw a huge and powerful statue of a man. It was made up of various materials. The head was gold, the breast and arms were silver, the belly and thighs were brass, the legs were iron, and the feet part iron and clay. And you saw it standing there, and you were terrified because you looked like a little grasshopper. It was a Frankenstein monster. But then you heard this terrible sound, and that also, in addition to what you were seeing, that terrified you. You saw a huge rock hovering over that statue like a helicopter, and the signal bombs away. The rock fell upon the statue, pulverized it into small powder, and then the wind blew it away. Well, That's what the dream was. Now, what did it mean? By the way, at this point, Daniel could have said anything he wanted and the king would have agreed. He could have said, here's what it means, O king. Listen carefully. I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. And Nebuchadnezzar said, that's great interpretation. No, he didn't do that. He said, this is what you saw. Here's what it means. This statue represents 4 Gentile world powers. The golden head was Babylon. You are the golden head. The silver chest and arms were Persia, and that'll be the nation, unfortunately, that'll take over from your nation and your empire. And then the third, the brass belly and thighs, symbolized Greece, who would take over from Persia. And the iron legs and iron clay feet were Rome, that would eventually take over the entire known ancient world. Now, we have a problem here. I'm sure that's interpretation, correct interpretation, but here's the problem. You have the golden head was Nebuchadnezzar, and the silver chest and arms, Persia, the brass belly, Greece, the irons and legs were Rome. The 4, he had them in chronological order. But the problem is that the smiting rock, Christ, and by the way, he said the 5th, he explained it this way, the 5th, the rock then that falls upon the statue of world Gentile power is God's final and finest kingdom, the kingdom of his Messiah, who will then establish his millennial reign. But the problem is that did not happen in the days where Jesus was raised under Roman dominion. In fact, to the contrary, he was put to death by the sentence of an officer representing the Fourth Empire. You see the problem there? You have one of 2 conclusions. Number 1, Daniel was smoking pot. Probably didn't write it in the first place, and so it's just crazy. Or secondly, save those lira, because Rome is going to rise again, and during the revived Roman Empire, then that smiting rock will fall upon world Gentile power at the Battle of Armageddon, and Jesus will usher in his millennial kingdom. Well, the king is really impressed with this, and he bows down to Daniel, and he acknowledges the God of Daniel as being the God of gods. He elevates Daniel to the highest office in Babylon, and then Daniel appoints Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to high offices. Chapter 3, one of my favorite chapters in this favorite book of mine, the book of Daniel, a fiery furnace. Now it begins, and here's a principle of hermeneutics. You cannot, the best way to understand the passage is to look at the context. In other words, what came before the passage, what would come after the passage. This is certainly true in Daniel chapter 3 because it begins by Nebuchadnezzar's constructing a golden statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. This, he said, on the plain of Dura. Now, why did he do this suddenly out of a blue sky? Well, actually, there were several reasons behind this project. Number 1 was to elevate Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel had designated Nebuchadnezzar as the head of gold, as he explained the meaning of the statue dream in chapter 2. But the old boy, he wanted to be the whole thing. And then secondly, why he built this statue, to consolidate his empire through a common religion. Well, on dedication day, at a given musical signal, all his officers and officials were to bow down and worship the image. Now, failure to do so would result in a fiery death. Now, there were 3 men, as the song says, did not bow, did not bend, and later on we'll learn they did not burn. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow. Now, where was Daniel? And I would think the context certainly indicates he must have been out on some kind of mission for the king, or there would have been 4 men that did not bow. But these 3 men did not bow. Well, this was brought to the attention of the king by some jealous Babylonians. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, though, offered them another chance. He said, look, I've got to straighten these guys out, but they're good men. And a good man's hard to find. I got 3 of them here. They're dependable. They're very talented. A little weird. They worship an invisible God, but I can put up with that. I'm going to give them another chance. So he calls them in. And this is what he says. Now, if ye, he said, fall down and worship the image when you hear the music, which I have made, you'll do well. But if you worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into a midst of burning fiery furnace. And he said, who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Here's how they answered. They said, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, we are not careful, we're not anxious, we're not hesitant to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, in other words, God may choose to allow us salvation at this time, or he may choose to permit us to become martyrs. It doesn't make any difference. Be known unto thee, O king, we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Well, he just goes bonkers. In an insane rage then, Nebuchadnezzar, who has now totally lost control of himself, orders the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter, and the 3 Hebrew heroes are bound and cast in. And all 3 are seen falling headlong into the hellish fires. Now, for some reason, the old boy stuck behind. He did not leave. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, hey guys, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. Well, he answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And would you believe, the fourth of the form of the 4th is like the Son of man, the Son of God. Well, let me just ask us, well, I'm going to have questions I want to ask you, but we will tell you how the story ends. Of course, the 3 friends then walk out of the furnace unharmed, with not even the smell of smoke upon them. You can't get in an airplane anymore and get off the airplane without smelling smoke. And so Nebuchadnezzar then issues a decree making it the death penalty to badmouth the God of Israel. Now, let me just ask you some mathematical questions now. Number 1 question, how many men did Nebuchadnezzar cast into the fiery furnace? Answer, of course, 3. Second question, how many men did Nebuchadnezzar see in the midst of the fiery furnace? Answer, 4. Third question, how many men came out of the fire? Answer, 3. Fourth question, what happened to the 4th man? And you know the answer to that? He's still in the fiery furnace. He's awaiting you to be there. In other words, he's not going to just accompany you to the fiery furnace during our time of trial and tribulation, and he does that too. But because he is the omnipresent God, he's there right now, even before you know about your fiery furnace that'll happen today or tomorrow, next year. He's there awaiting you. What a marvelous truth. Chapter 4, A Tree in Turmoil. Now, I think this chapter could be titled Nebuchadnezzar's Tract. I think it contains his personal testimony of those events which led him to repentance. Yes, I think we will see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. We used to argue in Dallas and other Moody Bible Institute, will we see Saul in heaven? Will we see some of these others? I don't think we'll see Saul in heaven. I'm confident we'll see Nebuchadnezzar. He had a better testimony than some Baptist deacons that I have known in my time, and I can pick on the Baptists because I'm a Baptist. But he begins by saying, this is his track, as it were, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Now, this is very strange, because normally he's issuing death decrees, but now he's saying to my people, God bless you, etc. And I just want you to know, really, this is my tract. I want to show you, give my testimony, how I came to the knowledge of Jehovah God. He saw a dream, and he related the dream to Daniel. He had a lot of Babylonian pizza pie before he went to bed. This is the second big dream that he had. And in this dream, he saw a large and leafy tree increasing in size until it reached the heavens and was viewed by all. And then the wild animals and birds were shaded and sheltered by its leafy branches, and the entire world was fed by its generous fruit supply. But suddenly, a heavenly figure appeared and ordered the tree cut down and its fruit scattered. Only the stump was to be left, banded with a chain of iron and brass. And this felled tree, we're told in the dream, represented a man who would then be given the mind of an animal and remain in this pitiful condition for 7 years. And this was to be done so that the entire world might know that, quote, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over the basest of men. Well, now he tells him the dream, and then Daniel gives the interpretation of the dream, and he said, the tree indeed stood for a man, and Nebuchadnezzar, you are that man. Now he said, because of your pride, you would suffer a 7-year period of insanity, and during this time you would act and think like a wild animal. And this affliction that'll come upon you will only end when you realize that the powers that be are ordained of God. And then Daniel begged the proud monarch to, quote, break off thy sins and repent, but all to no avail. Well, a year went by, nothing happened. But shortly after that, the king was strolling in the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, and note his arrogant boast. The king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Well, even while the king spoke these proud words, the judgment of God fell from heaven, and he was driven from the palace. We're told he was driven from men, and did eat grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. God turned him into a rock singer. But upon restoration of his pride turned to praise. Now, I said at the beginning, I think he was a saved man. Notice his testimony now. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever and ever. Now in the Hebrew, it's I continually blessed him, I continually praised him, I continually honored him, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation unto generation. Perhaps James Gray's song will be a favorite of Nebuchadnezzar's in heaven. If we do sing in heaven, I'm sure we're going to. His song, not have I gotten but what I received, grace has bestowed it since I have believed, boasting excluded, pride I abase, I'm only a sinner saved by grace. Once I was foolish, and sin ruled my heart, causing my footsteps from God to depart. But Jesus has found me, happy my case, I'm a sinner saved by grace. Suffer a sinner, allow a sinner, whose heart overflows, loving his Savior, to tell what he knows. Once more to tell it would I embrace, I'm only a sinner saved by grace. Only a sinner saved by grace. This is my story. To God be the glory. I'm only a sinner saved by grace.